Last year, Chinese President Xi Jinping said in a closed-door meeting that China would never embrace the judicial independence in the West. This is why people in Hong Kong are trying hard to reject the extradition bill because we do not believe in a country who looks down on human rights. We want to protect our legal system as the last barrier against Beijing's political interference. Apart from asking for the withdrawal of the bill, Hong Kong people also demand for an investigation into police brutality to save Hong Kong from turning into a police state. More importantly, we demand for the universal suffrage. We deeply believe that without any structural political reform and a government chosen by the people, there is no possibility for Hong Kong to restore prosperity. We cannot have a society compromising the interests of individuals. The voice of these people should always be heard. Unfortunately, our government ignores our demands by saying that we have no stake in the society. Our student union members are detained, followed, beaten, and threatened. During the detainment, one of our student union members were told by the police that it was reasonable for them to rape some female protesters when they frequently worked overtime. People who side with Beijing are now advocating to install surveillance cameras inside the classroom to monitor teachers and students who dare to support class strike and support the movement. This is the right terror created by the Beijing government, which should be alerted by all people here. Nowadays, students and Hong Kong people are even ready to die for Hong Kong, and some already did. They believe that the only limit to their freedom is their death. This is the ultimate sacrifice for the motherland, and we must not forget them. Many students face strong objection from their family. Some of them are even forced to leave home. But they still choose to head to the front line carrying a letter with their last will. They are determined. They understand that the price of freedom is high. It always has been. But it is a price they are willing to pay, and it is a path of liberation they are willing to choose. We do not fight for freedom out of passion. Passion will burn out. We fight for freedom from a sense of duty and dignity. Teachers, students, civil servants, businessmen are all facing political purge in Hong Kong. This new form of imperialism of China poses a severe threat to Hong Kong. This is a clash of values and system. We need to contain the Communist Party of China. One country, two systems will expire in 2047. U.S. government should help Hong Kong people have the right to decide our future. Therefore, we urge the U.S. Congress to pass the Human Rights and Democracy Act. U.S. must send a strong signal that this special status should be cancelled if Hong Kong lost its autonomy in order to put pressure on China. Hong Kong people will take every step with the last inch of our effort to fight for democracy and freedom. As Thomas Jefferson once said that he would be forever against any form of tyranny. And I believe this is the time for Americans to stand with Hong Kong. 光復香港，時代革命。Thank you.
Sadly, it has become a daily occurrence to see youngsters being pinned to the ground with head concussions, if not being knocked unconscious. On the other hand, riot police and plainclothes officers have since early on deliberately hidden their ID numbers and warrant cards, making it impossible for us to even certify their legitimacy, let alone hold them accountable. On August 21st, police from the Special Tactical Unit charged into Prince Edward MTR station, beating up passengers randomly. They then shut down the station for 24 hours, refusing medical care for those who were injured, raising even suspicions of possible deaths in the station. Separately now, they will be charging in secondary school yards, shopping malls, and buses where young people merely dressed in black can be searched or even arrested without justification. In other words, merely being young is a crime in the police state of Hong Kong. Hong Kong represents something unique in the world. We have long held dear our rule of law, transparent institutions, and the freedom of expression. However, this system is now under great threat. Companies like Hong Kong's major airline Cathay Pacific has succumbed to political pressure, firing dozens of employees due to their political stance. The business community is coerced into making political decisions. As a singer and activist from Hong Kong, I have experienced the suppression firsthand. Ever since the umbrella movement in 2014, I have been blacklisted by the communist government. My songs and my name are censored on Chinese internet. Pressured by the Chinese government, sponsors have pulled out, even international brands have kept their distances. For the past 5 years, and even more so recently, China tried to smear and silence me with their propaganda machines, spreading false claims. Right now, I am facing threats from pro-Beijing supporters and could face arrest and prosecution at any time. The freedom Americans enjoy is something that the people of Hong Kong have long hoped for. Even though our languages and cultures differ, what we have in common is the pursuit for justice, freedom, and democracy. If Hong Kong falls, it would easily become the springboard for the totalitarian regime of China to push its rules and priorities overseas, utilizing its economic powers to conform others to their communist values, just as they have done with Hong Kong in the past 22 years. The US and its allies have everything to fear if they wish to maintain a world that is free, open, and civil. I therefore urge the US Congress to stand by Hong Kong, and most of all, to pass the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act.
Today, we are approaching dangerously close to one country, one system. The present state of affairs reflects Beijing's inability to understand, let alone govern, a free society. The ongoing demonstration began on June 9th, when 1 million Hong Kongers took to the street in protest of proposed legislation that would have allowed criminal suspects to be extradited from Hong Kong to China, where there are no guarantees of the rule of law. Still, before the night have ended, Chief Executive Carrie Lam announced the bill's reading would assume and resume in 3 days. Hong Kongers were preparing for the last flight on June 12th. And then the unthinkable happened. Knowing that Beijing controlled enough votes in the Legislative Council, protesters surrounded the complex earlier in the morning, successfully preventing lawmakers from convening. Lam suspended the bill on June 15, but fell short of fully withdrawing it. A historical 2 million people demonstrate the following day, equivalent to 1 in 4 out of our entire population. I'm not aware of anything comparable to this level of discontent against a government in modern history. I was released exactly 3 months ago, on June 17, and have since joined fellow Hong Kongers to protest in the most creative ways possible. In addition to the bill withdrawn, we demand Lam to retract label on us as rioters, drop all political charges, and conduct an independent investigation into police brutality. Some of us crowdfunded for newspaper advertisement ahead of the G20 summit in late June, calling for the world not to legalize Hong Kong. Others entered the Chamber of Legislative Council complex on July 1st. The same day, another 500,000 Hong Kongers protest peacefully. Crowds continue to show up in large number in the past 15 weekends, with small rallies taking place almost daily across the territories. But the government would not listen. Instead of diffusing the political crisis, it dramatically empowered the riot police. The movement reached a turning point on 21 of July. That night, pro-Beijing thugs with suspect ties to organized crime gathered in the Yuen Long train station and indiscriminately attacked not just protesters returning home, reporters on the scene, but even passers-by. The police refused to show up despite repeated emergency calls, plunging Hong Kong into a police state with mob violence. On August 5th alone, the day Hong Kongers participate in a general strike, riot police shoot 800 canisters of tear gas to disperse the peaceful mass. Compare that to only 87 fires in the entire umbrella movement 5 years ago. The police's excessive force today is clear. Their excessive use of pepper spray, pepper balls, rubber bullets, beanbag rounds, and water cannons, almost all of which are imported from Western democracy, are no less troubling. In light of this, I applaud Chairman McGovern and Congressman Smith for introducing the Protect Hong Kong Act last week. Americans' company must not profit from the violent crackdown of freedom-loving Hong Kongers. Co-Chairman Rubio is also right for recently writing that Hong Kong's special status under American law depends on the city being treated as a separate customs area. Beijing should not have it both ways, grabbing all the economic benefit of Hong Kong's standing in the world, while erosion of our freedom. This is the most important reason why the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act enjoys the broad support of Hong Kong civil society. Lam finally withdrew the bill earlier this month, but just as protesters have long stopped calling for her resignation, this decision was almost meaningless by now. The movement is far from over because it has long moved beyond one bill or one person. Our most important demand is genuine structural change in Hong Kong, which means free election. Our government's lack of representation lies at the heart of the matter. As I speak, Hong Kong is standing at a critical juncture. The stakes have never been higher. We are confronted by the huge Chinese military build-up just across the border in Shenzhen. President Xi Jinping is unlikely to take hardline action before the upcoming National Day in October. But no one can be sure what's next. Sending in the tanks remain irrational, but not impossible. With Chinese interference in Taiwan, Tibet, and especially Xinjiang, it serves as a reminder that Beijing is prepared to go far in pursuit of its grand imperial project. I was once the face of Hong Kong's youth activism. In this leaderless movement, my sacrifices are minimal compared to those among us who have been laid off of protesting, who have been injured but too afraid of even going to a hospital, or who have been forced to take their own life, to have each lost an eye. The youngest of the 1,500 arrested so far is only 12 years old schoolboy. I don't know them personally, yet their pain is my pain. We belong to the same community, struggling for our right of self-determination, so we can build one brighter and common future. A child born today will not even have celebrated his or her 28th birthday by 2047, when the 50 years unchanged policy is set to expire. That deadline is closer to us than it appears. There's no return for us. Decades from now, when historians look back, I'm sure that 2019 will turn out to have been a watershed. I hope historians will celebrate the United States Congress for having stood on the side of Hong Kongers, the side of human rights and democracy.
This morning is a very special one. We are here to welcome to the Capitol some very brave champions for democracy, for freedom of expression in Hong Kong. For 15 weeks, the protesters in Hong Kong have sent a stirring message to the rest of the world about the dreams of freedom and justice can never be extinguished by injustice and intimidation. In the United States Congress, we are swiftly advancing the bipartisan Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which reaffirms the commitment to democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in the face of Beijing's crackdown. We will bring this bill to the floor as soon as possible.
Today we stand here not as Republicans or Democrats, but as Americans united in our strong support for Hong Kong. And I'd like to speak directly to the people of Hong Kong. America stands with you, and America will always support you. We hear you sing our national anthem. We see you carrying our American flag. This is a battle between democracy versus dictatorship, liberty versus tyranny, and freedom versus oppression. We all stand here today as Americans united with freedom-loving peoples in Hong Kong as the Chinese Communist Party continues to commit human rights violations. So next week, we will move this bill forward. We will show China there will be consequences to their ruthless and brutal actions.
I'm honored to be here with these incredibly brave activists who are standing up to intimidation and persevering in the pursuit of justice. They're doing so at great personal risk to their safety, and they deserve our unwavering support and admiration. And that's why I'm proud that we will be advancing the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. We hope to have it in the Foreign Affairs Committee next week. This act sends a strong message to Beijing that today, in 2019, 30 years after the massacre in Tiananmen Square, Chinese authorities will not get away with using violence and intimidation to squash the fundamental freedoms, freedom of speech, of assembly, of demonstration, that are guaranteed by law to the people of Hong Kong. It also sends the message that Beijing's attempt to undermine Hong Kong's autonomy is not just a problem for the people of Hong Kong, it's a concern of the United States as well. Now, let me say in conclusion, when it comes to Hong Kong, as you just heard from Mr. McCall, Democrats and Republicans in Congress are on the same side, the side of the people of Hong Kong, the side of democracy and human rights. And we're not going to ever be on the wrong side. And we'll always be standing with the brave people of Hong Kong. Thank you.
It's my honor and pleasure to be invited, and I strongly recognize today is the remarkable day to show how the new bipartisan consensus on China foreign policy, under the uprising China model and the hardline suppression of President Xi to Hong Kong, Hong Kongers never walk alone in the front line to confront hardline dictatorship. In such uphill battle, we might be downhearted or depressed. But in the past 3 months, in such summer of discontent, we strongly realize people in the free world strongly support Hong Kong people continue our fight. Today is the remarkable day also emphasize how the efforts of Hong Kongers in the past 3 months is not only included inside Hong Kong, but also overseas Hong Kongers, no matter Anna, Jeffrey, and Brian based in the United States, and others of our friends live all around the world to show that we stand as one, we stand in solidarity. Hong Kongers never walk alone, and we will continue our uphill battle until the day we enjoy freedom and democracy.
Since 1989, since the Tiananmen Square massacre 30 years ago, I've had the privilege of working in a bipartisan way with Speaker Pelosi on human rights, the rule of law, and democracy for the people of China. We have always believed that every person in China deserves better, and we have always understood that solemn promises made by Beijing were seldom kept, and that far too many leaders of the free world were far too eager to blindly accept fiction over fact. Under President Xi Jinping, human rights abuse throughout China, including pervasive use of torture, religious persecution, and human trafficking, have significantly worsened. That 2 million people turned out for one of the protests. That's 1/4 of the entire population of Hong Kong, 2 million people, and of course hundreds of thousands as well, and others. 5 years ago in 2014, joined by Speaker Pelosi, I introduced the bipartisan Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. We did it again in 2015, we did it again in 2017, and again this year, 4 times. And it has been blocked. It's been blocked by certain interests who don't want this to go forward, but now with the Speaker's leadership, it will get a vote up or down, and I believe it will prevail significantly. And briefly, some of the things it'll do, it directs the Secretary of State to certify to Congress annually whether Hong Kong continues to deserve special treatment under U.S. law. And that is a very big issue. Directs the State Department not, I say again, not to deny entry visas based on the applicant's arrest or detention for participating in nonviolent protest activities in Hong Kong. Has not happened. We want to make sure it doesn't happen. Requires an annual report from the Commerce Department on whether the Hong Kong government adequately enforces U.S. export controls and sanctions laws. It directs the Secretary of State to submit a strategy to protect Americans and American businesses in Hong Kong, and requires the President to identify and sanction persons, including the use of the Magnitsky Act in Hong Kong and in mainland China, responsible for human rights abuses. I've heard it said, and I'll finish with this, that the business of Hong Kong is often said it's business, I think it's absolutely clear that the business of Hong Kong is freedom.
It's my honor to be here to witness this extraordinary and incredible moment that is being dedicated to the freedom fighter in Hong Kong. For Hong Kong, autonomy, democracy, and rule of law has always been our core values, and I believe that by the introduction and passage of the bill, it will usher into another new era of US-Hong Kong relationship that we both preserving this value and make it into our priority into the long fight of our journey. We witnessed a huge crackdown of our rule of law system with more than 1,500 of people arrested in the recent protests, with the youngest age at age 12. And we witnessed excessive force used by the police force and our fellow protesters that have to face rubber bullets and some other lethal weapons on a daily basis. And the police force has no checks and balances, and they could do whatever they want.
Over the last 100 days, we have seen a popular and grassroots movement from all walks of life. Young people, students, women, seniors, entrepreneurs, teachers, civil servants, workers. This is an unprecedented and sustained show of unity. This is a movement unlike the world has ever seen in size, scope, creativity, and effectiveness. The protesters are educated, savvy, mobilized, and executing a strategy. They are using technology to mobilize, stay anonymous, and organize protests. They are respectful, and they have been apologizing to bystanders who have been inconvenienced. They are picking up garbage and recycling. They are using art, music, laser pointers, and the projection of messages on buildings to highlight their struggle. And overall, the protests have largely been peaceful, despite being subject to violence and lack of restraint on the part of the Hong Kong authorities. So we support very strongly the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act that Chris Smith has introduced. But we also support another bill that Chris Smith and I introduced, and we hope we can bring it to the floor as well, called the Protect Hong Kong Act, to prohibit the sale of police equipment to Hong Kong. U.S. companies should not be complicit in a crackdown on pro-democracy protesters.
Hello, everyone. I am a singer and pro-democracy activist from Hong Kong. At this very difficult but also very empowering time in Hong Kong, where this millions of people in Hong Kong in widespread participation from all walks of life, it is not only the young people, but really everyone who believes in these universal values and who want to protect our city from the erosion of our democracy. Everyone have been standing in the streets together as one. So I want to thank the Congress for giving the support, because this is a message to these Hong Kong people that we are not isolated in this fight. We are in the forefront of this very global fight for universal values. So thank you so much, and we are in solidarity.
The withdrawal of the extradition bill was the success that you had. It's welcome news, but as we all know, it's not enough. Much more must be done to fully realize the legitimate aspirations of the Hong Kong people in the guaranteed order of one country, two systems. The pro-Beijing leadership in Hong Kong must ensure a political system accountable to the people, including guaranteed universal suffrage, as has been mentioned, and investigating police violence. I've said over and over under many circumstances,
百姓的义，治百姓的良，凭什么对百姓举起你的枪？都是父母生，都是最底层，凭什么帮贪官欺负普通人？放下你的枪，良心不 要丧，为自己为亲人做个好儿郎。穿百姓的衣，吃百姓的粮，凭什么对百姓举起你的枪？都是父母生，都是最底层，凭什么帮贪官欺负普通人？放下你的枪，良心不要丧，为自己为亲人做个好儿郎。穿百姓的衣，吃百姓的粮，凭什么对百姓举起你的枪？都是父母生，都是最底层，凭什么帮贪官欺负普通人？放下你的枪，良心不要丧，为自己为亲人做个好儿郎。